सलवात। أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفر إنه كان توابا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. الفاتح.
नौहा था ये ज़ैनब का कैद हो के जाती हूँ। नौहा था ये ज़ैनब का कैद हो के जाती हूँ। लुट गई मेरी दुनिया कैद हो के जाती हूँ। नौहा था ये ज़ैनब का कैद हो के जाती हूँ। चल बसा मेरा बाई बेहू और तन्हाई। चल बसा मेरा बाई मैं हूँ और तन्हाई। कोई भी नहीं अपना कैद हो के जाती हूँ। नौहा था ये ज़ैनब का कैद हो के जाती हूँ। चलती रेत पर असगर नींद आ गई क्यों कर। जलती रेत पर असगर नींद आ गई क्यों कर। तप रहा है बन सारा कैद हो के जाती हूँ। नौहा था ये ज़ैनब का कैद हो के जाती हूँ। जब से जल गए ख़ैमे सहम है बच्चे। जब से जल गए ख़ैमे सहम है बच्चे। जुल्म करते हैं आदा कैद हो के जाती हूँ। नौहा था ये ज़ैनब का कैद हो के जाती हूँ। सर के तुम पे माँ जाई मेरे बेकफन बाई। सदके तुम पे माँ जाई मेरे बेकफन बाई। कैसे चैन आएगा कैद हो के जाती हूँ। नौहा था ये ज़ैनब का कैद हो के जाती हूँ। लुट गई मेरी दुनिया कैद हो के जाती हूँ नौहा था ये ज़ैनब का, कैद हो के जाती हूँ। सलवात।
करबला की कहानी जब कोई भी सुनाएगा, दिल वालों के आँखों से एक दरिया बहाएगा। वो कारवां सरवर का जो चानों से निकला था, सुगरा को खबर क्या थी, नालो टके आएगा। मेहमान बुलाया है ऊपियो सरवर को, क्या कुंभा ये दिन का पानी नहीं पाएगा। पामाल हुआ कासिम यूं घोरों की टापों से, किस तरह चचा तेरी मैयत को उठाएगा। हाथों का कटने का कुछ गम का न दिलावर हो, सैदानियों का पर्दा अब कौन बचाएगा। टूटी है कमर से की घबराना मगर अकबर, फर्जंदे नबी तेरी लाशे को उठाएगा। सोते न तुम असगर झूले में तड़पते थे, दुनिया को क्या खबर थी एक तीर सुनाएगा। असहाब ने दम तोड़ा शब्बीर के जानों पर, किस जानों पर सर अपना सब वीर उठाएगा। सरवर ने उठाई सब साथियों के लाशें, सब वीर तेरे लाशा अब कौन उठाएगा। सलवार।
सलवात। नारे तकबीर, नारे रिसालत, नारे हैदरी, या खुदा मैंने इन्हीं के लिए है सर को दिया, या खुदा मैंने इन्हीं के लिए है सर को दिया, इन्हीं के लोगों में फ़िदा अकबर व अस्कर को किया, इन्हीं लोगों में फ़िदा अकबर व अस्कर को किया, इनकी बख्शिश के लिए रंज सहा जुल्म सहा, इनकी बख्शिश के लिए रंज सहा जुल्म सहा। और ज़ैनब की असीरी को भी मंजूर किया, और ज़ैनब की असीरी को भी मंजूर किया। कर खुदे की ये लहद मुझको न चैन आएगा, कर खुदे की ये लहद मुझको न चैन आएगा, नंगे सरहस तले तेरा हुसैन आएगा। सलवात।
और मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलावत। इन्ना लिल्लाहि व इन्ना इलैहि राजिऊन। Notice of death in our community. Mu'mineen, Brother Syed Afzal Mehdi's beloved mother, Marhuma Sayyida Aziz Fatima, also known as Katki Begum, passed away today. Marhuma was the beloved mother of Syed Afzal Mehdi, Sister Shahnaz Fatima, Sister Yasmin Fatima, Sister Parveen Fatima, and Sister Nasreen Fatima. Mu'mineen, inshallah, the burial will take place tomorrow, the 8th of September at 2 p.m. at the Eastfield Road Cemetery. Mu'mineen are humbly requested to remember the Marhuma in their du'as, and you're all humbly requested to recite Surah Fatiha for the Marhuma and Kul Marhumin, Surah Al-Mubarakatul Fatiha. Bismillah. Ruhani Majlis announcement. Mu'mineen, our Jamaat is sponsoring today's Majlis for the Saleh Sawab of Marhum Ayatullah Syed Muhammad Syed Al-Hakim, who passed away in Najaful Ashraf. Second Majlis has been sponsored by Al-Haj Muhammad Taqi Bhai Jairaj Merali for the Saleh Sawab of Marhuma Fatma Bhai Binte Musa Nagji, Marhum Jairaj Bhai Merali Harji, Marhuma Sherbanu Bhai Binti Jafar Pira Khata, Marhumeens of Jairaj Merali family, Marhumeens of Muhammad Taqi Ali Bhai Jafar family, Marhumeens of Fazal Islam family, Marhumeens of Fazal Manji Pardhan family, Marhumeens of Jafar Mekji family, and Kul Marhumeens. The next Majlis has been sponsored by Marhum Jafar Ali Muhammad Hussain Ali Bhai Danji for the Saleh Sawab of Marhum Jafar Ali Bhai Muhammad Hussain Ali Bhai Danji, Marhum Amir Ali Bhai Kaaba, Marhumeen of Danji family, and Kul Marhumeen. The next Majlis by Marhum Ali Bhai Jafar family for the Saleh Sawab of Marhum Ali Bhai Jafar, Marhum Jena Bhai Ali Bhai Jafar, Marhum Muhammad Ali Bhai Jafar, Marhum Anwar Ali Bhai Jafar, Marhum Sultan Ali Bhai Jafar, Marhum Anwar Bhai Pyar Ali Merali, and Kul Marhumeen. The next Majlis is sponsored by Marhum Al-Haj Rustam Ali Bhai Ghulam Hussain Rahmatullah for the Saleh Sawab of Marhuma Fatma Bhai Rahmatullah, Marhum Ghulam Hussain Bhai Rahmatullah, Marhuma Amina Bhai Binti Hassan Ali Kanani, Marhuma Kaj Bhai Datu, and Kul Marhumeens. And the last Majlis has been sponsored by Abbas Haidar Huda, Siana and Atia Mikdad Khalfan for the Saleh Sawab of Marhum Ahmad Bhai Bandali Manji, Marhum Ghulam Hussain Bhai Hirji, Marhuma Rukia Bhai Karim Tirani, Marhuma Marsia Bhai Walji, Marhum Ghulam Bhai Sherali, Marhumeens of Hasham Karmali family, Marhumeens of Sherali family, Marhumeens of Khalfan family, Marhumeens of Marhum Raza Hussain Tarbai Huda family, Marhumeens of Jagbar family, Marhumeens of Hashim Sharif Devji family, and Kul Marhumeens, you are all humbly requested to recite Surah Fatiha for all the Marhumeens. Al-Fatiha. Bismillah.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. فاتحة. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله على سيدنا مولانا حبيب إله العالمين أبو القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على القوم الظالمين من الآن إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا آخر الأحد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. يا رحمة الله الواسعة، يا باب نجاة الأمة، يا عبرة لكل مؤمن ومؤمنات، غريب مظلوم كربلاء. فيا ليتني يا ليتني كنا معكم سادتي، فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لولا ينهاهم الربانيون والأحبار عن قولهم العثم وأكلهم السحت لبئس ما كانوا يصنعون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم. We begin by thanking Allah Azza wa Jal that despite the difficult times that we are facing and the busyness of life, we have at least one more opportunity to gather for the love of Husayn ibn Ali alayhi salam with the salawat. That Allah Azza wa Jal chooses who attends the majalis, who has the honor and the blessing of gathering for dhikr of Husayn, for musibah for Husayn, We begin by thanking Him that He chose me at least one more time today together. As we gather today, we are in the context, of course, of the death of one of the great maraji of our time, Ayatollah Syed al-Hakim. And, the organizers told me we should speak a little bit about this issue to understand who was this great scholar. But before we know who this scholar was, we have to realize a very important fact. If you look at the tradition of Islam and the ayat of Quran and our madhab, we have good ulama and bad ulama. This is a fact. On the one hand, we have certain riwayat which show us the actual capacity of what an alim can be. For example, the hadith from Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That the ulama of my faith, of my path, some of them are greater than the anbiya of Banu Israel. The ulama, just the scholars. Afdal, greater than the anbiya. Or for example, the famous narration that when there is the death of a scholar, an alim, there is a gap in the community which can never be filled. This is a fact and hadith. On the other hand, when our Imam Sahib al-Asr wa Zaman alayhi salam, when he returns, we have riwayat. One of the first communities who will oppose him and be killed for the opposition is ulama. One hadith says 3,000 scholars will be killed when he returns. So if I look at the books, I see two types of hadith. One which makes ulama showing us the genuine capacity that they have and that their ma'yar can be. And then there are some who are insulted and shown to be low, wearing the libas of an alim, but acting against the deen. So now me, as a normal person, was thinking, okay, how can I tell the difference between the alim who is genuinely for the sake of this deen and the one who is pretending, or the one who is not really acting on this, the one who maybe will oppose my imam? What we need, if we're looking at it in this way, is a framework. Some sort of test or standard or lens we wear. And when we use this test, we can see the difference between a genuine alim of this madhab and one who's an imposter. Okay. The place we look, the resource to see what is a good alim and a bad alim or a false alim is the example of Abu Abdullah Husaini ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. As all of you know, Imam Hussain alayhi salam on the way to Karbala goes on many different destinations and stops. One place he goes to is Mina, where he cannot finish his Hajj correctly or fully, and then he has to leave. He can't do mukammal of Hajj. He goes to Mina. When he goes to Mina, he gives a speech, a lecture. After this khutbah, we have an example of what is the difference between a good and bad alim. Why? In this speech, Imam Hussein criticizes the ulama of his time. He says what they are. He gives in that speech 6 different critiques of the ulama of his time. And he goes through them in detail, how they have abandoned Ali Muhammad. Now, I have this resource, this speech. Maybe some of us have heard it before, maybe we haven't heard it. Now, I can look at how Hussein describes good and bad ulama, and now I can look at my community. Are the ulama of my day now fulfilling the criteria of a good or a bad alim based on the words of Hussein ibn Ali? So in today's lecture, inshallah, let's look at this speech. Let's look at those 6 different critiques of ulama from Abu Abdullah. And then when we now look at who is Ayatollah Hakim, we'll see what a great shining alim we have had in our qawm. And we know exactly who he is. So we know the one of truth by knowing the path of truth first. So that's our discussion today. First we look at this speech, we look at what are those 6 points of critique from Abu Abdullah. And Imam Khomeini rahmatullahi has a commentary of this speech. And then we look at Ayatollah Hakim. And maybe then we'll realize the real loss we've had in our qawm. And it's true, when an alim from this faith does pass away, they leave a void which can never be filled. And the void left by Ayatollah Muhammad Syed al-Hakim will never be filled. Why? Let's see, inshallah. Do I have your support, inshallah? Are you with me? If you are with me, inshallah. Allahumma salli ala. And to welcome our Imam Batam Sahib Asr with the most salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Imam Hussein goes to Mina. He brings his followers, his family with him. When they are there, he gives this speech in which he first of all criticizes the ulama of his time for not doing the very thing he has to now do, which is what? He says very clearly, all of this majlis, all this meaning, all this movement, this gathering, everything comes back to one region, that he leaves his home. إِنِّي مَا خَرَجْتُ أَشْرًا. I'm not leaving to cause any revolt. وَلَا بَاطِرًا وَلَا مُفْسِدًا وَلَا ظَالِمًا. I'm not leaving for any fasad or fitna. Hussein says, إِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلَبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ فِي أُمَّتِ جَدِّي. I'm leaving my home to reform the ummah of my grandfather. One aim. I need to reform and bring it back to its origin. He then says, the reason why I'm leaving is because the people are no longer doing amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar. They've forgotten it. Enjoining good, forbidding evil. They're not doing it anymore. Usually when something's right or good, you praise it. When something's wrong, you criticize it. He says, today no one speaks against dhulm, and those who are people of righteousness have no voice. It's not being done anymore. We have a narration from Amir al-Mu'minin Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. He says, if you let go of amr and nahi in your qawm, if you stop encouraging good and forbidding evil, Allah will select from you the worst of you to lead you. Because you're no longer regulating right and wrong anymore. So now the most evil one can stand and no one will oppose them anymore. That's why we have another narration, which is the way you are, you will be governed. If ever you see a bad leader, they must have come from somewhere. So now look at Hussein. He sees Yazid alayhimullah on the minbar, the Khalifa, and he says, a man like me cannot give bay'at to a man like him. But when he goes to Mina, he says, why have the ulama not themselves solved this problem? Why me? And he gives an example. He goes to the Quran of Surah 5 verse 63, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Lawla, if it was not for yanhahum al-rabbaniyun wal-ahbar. He says, why don't the rabbis and the ulama of different faiths, and why do they not come together, al-ahbar, and qawlihim al-itham, and speak at least one word against those who do dhulm in front of them? وَأَكْلِهِمُ السُّحُتْ, and those who are eating the wealth in front of them, why are they silent? It's an example from Quran. لَبِئْسَ مَا كَانُوا يَنْصُرُونَ. They are cursed, the ones who are silent, while their qawm is doing wrongdoing. In the example of Banu Israel, there are many cases where the people are doing wrong things, and it's the silence of the learned people which allowed the wrongdoing to happen. When Nabi Salih leaves, and he says, this camel which I have left behind, the she camel, there's a rule here. On one day, don't touch it, let it drink and eat as it wants, and give its milk to its children. On the other day, you're allowed to drink. When he comes back, they've hamstrung the camel and they have taken over. He says, the one who attacked the camel is cursed, but the one who was silent while it was happening is also part of the same sin. They were silent. So here comes Abu Abdullah. He sees in history the ulama of different faiths, and now he sees the same ulama of his faith. And he's saying, you're doing the same thing. There's wrongdoing in front of you, and you remain silent. You've allowed someone like Yazid to rise. Why? Why were you silent? And he gives 6 critiques of them. Let's go through them. Number 1, Abu Abdullah says on this day, the ulama, the scholars, he says, you have a certain respect amongst you from the masses, from the people. Why do you then align yourselves to the rulers? Your whole izzah, your whole honor comes because you're from the people. They know you, they ask you questions. Hussein says, so why have you taken all that respect from the people and now you're close to Banu Umayyah? And you have sold yourself to their fatwa, their rulings. An alim in those days wasn't an alim today. An alim in those days was someone who has memorized the hadith of Rasulullah and is now narrating them and teaching people what did the Prophet say. Why are people at that time joining the same minbar where Rasulullah sat, who are now doing la'an of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam? Ulama of that day. He says, you gain your respect from the people are who give you honor, and now you curse my father on the minbar? Why do you join the ruler at this time? Read a salawat, please. For those who have arrived late, I'll just give a recap. We are going through Imam Hussein's sermon at Mina where he criticizes the ulama of his time. Number 1, the ulama get their respect from the people. The people give them power, authority, and now they join the unjust ruler. After Karbala, after it's happened, some ulama of that time tried to justify what happened at that day by saying it wasn't Yazid who killed Abu Abdullah, it was Allah. At that time, the Ash'arite movement, which was growing at that time, had the belief that we don't do tafweed, we don't give people any authority, everything is Allah. So when they said to them, there's a man who's a Khalifa and he's just killed Husayn ibn Ali, what do you say? They say, Allah killed him. It wasn't Yazid, it was Allah. They want to absolve Banu Umayyah from their crime and even criticize them and praise them. No, he says, Allah killed Hussein. It wasn't Yazid. Why? Allah has all power. Allah is Malikul Mulk. Allah has the one of Shahib al-Quwwa. It wasn't Yazid. He's just an innocent person who was doing the will of another. This same argument was used at Siffin. At Siffin, we saw the death of Ammar ibn Yasir. The same Ammar who the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, the one who kills Ammar, they are the munafiqeen. They are the hypocrites. Okay, look at Siffin. Ammar is fighting with Imam Ali against Muawiyah. He's shaheed. Imam Ali later on at Jamal looks at Talha and says, do you not remember that hadith? He says, yes, I remember. Ammar was killed fighting for who? For you or for me? For you. So if Rasulullah says the one who killed him is a munafiq and your leaders killed him, why are you not following me? Why are you not obeying me? Why have you gone against me? The answer was this. They says, Ya Ali, you are the one who brought Ammar to the battlefield. So because you invited him to fight with you, you're the one who killed him, you're the one who brought him, and you're responsible for his death. You see the logic they're using. They're absolving their leaders, take away all responsibility. Imam Ali replied, in that case, did not Rasulullah bring Hamza to Uhud? Was Hamza alayhi salam not shaheed at Uhud? Are you saying Rasulullah is the one who killed Hamza on that day? If you're not blaming Rasulullah for bringing the death of his companion, how are you calling me the munafiq when you're the one who slaughtered him? The same argument used against Yazid. Well, no, it wasn't Yazid's fault. Banu Umayyah are fine. It was Allah Azza wa Jal. No. Imam Hussein says the role of the ulama is don't stand alongside the unjust ruler. Be with the people, be among the masses. Don't allow your deen to be used by the politicians. We see this today as well. We saw this many, many years later. Where do we see this? One main day we saw this when the ulama sold out was in the year 1744. Read the salawat, please. 1744 in Arabia, in a land called Dir'iyah, there's a meeting. A meeting between two families. One family, Muhammad bin Ali Saud, the son of Saud, the first of that generation. The other is a group led by Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. They've come together in this land, 1744. Saud says, look, I have an army and I want to conquer Hijaz, but I have no authority or legitimacy. Ibn Wahhab says, look, I'm an alim, I'm a scholar, I give fatwa, but I have no army. Let's agree on this date. You bring the sword, I bring the book. Any action you wish to do, I'll give a ruling to justify it as an alim. And anytime you need a fatwa to support your activities, call upon me, I'll give a ruling. From that day onwards, this army was formed under the banner of Saud, and they traveled from town to town conquering them one by one. Each town they conquered, they had a ruling. Either accept us or you must give zakat to us, or not, you are wajibul qatl. Why? Fatwa Wahhab. That group named to be called Wahhabis, this was Ali Saud. From that time until 1802, they conquered all of Hijaz. And then they marched towards Karbala. In 1802 and in 1804, they marched to Karbala, an army led by the son, Ibn al-Aziz ibn Saud, holding in their hands the rulings of Ibn Wahhab that you cannot build a shrine. The argument of Ibn Taymiyyah, they marched. They went to Karbala, they destroyed the dome of Abu Abdullah, the Dhari, and they robbed many of the jewels of that land, and they killed 2,000 Zawar on that day. At Karbala. Why? Because they had an alim of their faith saying, this is the ruling, this is the ruling. When you have the deen of Ali Muhammad and you have ilm, you cannot sell yourself to the politician. Here comes Abu Abdullah, seeing ashab of his grandfather supporting Yazid. He says, number one, your role as an alim is to work for the people, not work for the unjust ruler. Read a salawat, please. The second critique of Imam Hussein on the day of Mina to the ulama is that you were given a responsibility to stand for the weak and those who are madhloom. And you have now squandered the rights of the oppressed. The mustad'afin can no longer go to the ulama and ask for guidance and help. They've been placed a thawb, a barrier between the scholars and the people. He says, your role, Abu Abdullah says, is to stand for the oppressed before anyone. Why do I see you have abandoned the very task Allah gave to you? When Imam Ali sends Malik al-Ashtar to Egypt And he has that famous letter that he gives to him, letter 53. He says to him, you need to be like a father to the children of the Qawm. They're like children to you. Guide them, be nice to them, be kind. If they make mistakes, forgive them. If they're good, encourage them, reward them. Whether they're in the army, or they're chief judges, or they're in your administration, or they're opposing you, be kind to them, be loving to them. Then he says, as for the ulama of the Qawm, the same thing. The people must be able to access them directly. And if they can't, send someone to the poor who can take their message back to the ruler of the time. That's the ideal situation. But look at it today. Today, in time of Imam Husain alayhi salam, the weak and the poor have no rights anymore. And because they have no rights, and the ulama have neglected it, Abu Abdullah says, why have you not stood for the oppressed already? In Sermon 3 of Nahj al-Balagha is Sermon of Shiqshaqiyya. I'm not going to go through it today. I have discussed it at length in the first 10 days of Muharram. At the end of that sermon, at the end, Abu Abdullah, Imam alayhi salam has spoken about the khulafa and fadak and all of these things and given his true heart's feeling of the haqq taken away from him. In the end, he says to them a famous line which I'll read out for you now as to why he even wants this khilafah. He says to them, look, لولا حضور الحاضر, if it was not for the people who actually came to me and rushed towards me, والقيام والحجة بوجود الناصر, if my followers had not already exhausted every single argument for me to actually become a khalifa, وما أخذ الله على العلماء, and if the ulama had not broken their promise to Allah. Which promise? Allah yuqaru ala al-kidhati al-dhalim wa la suqat al-madhlum. Don't bow yourself to the stomach of the oppressor, and don't neglect the hungry stomach of the poor. If it wasn't for these things, wasn't for the ulama neglecting their role and people rushing towards me, لَأَلْقَيْتُ حَبْلُهَا عَلَى الْغَارِبِهَا, I would have taken khilafah and I would have thrown the ropes right back to you. I don't want khilafah. I don't need khilafah. وَلَسَقِيتُ آخِرُهَا بِكَأْسِ الْأَوَّلِهَا, and I would treat the last of you just like I treated the first of you. I don't want khilafah. I don't need khilafah. Does Ali need to be a khalifa? No, he's an imam. It's a much greater level. An imam is an imam of ard and samawat. A khalifa has one territory he controls. He says, I don't need this khulafat. I don't need it. You need me. I'm already an imam. My level is much higher. Ya Ali. Allahumma salli ala. Because I've heard a nara, you've encouraged me. There's a poet. The poet says this line in Urdu that Ali ko kaise main maulai kainat kahun, Ali ko kaise main maulai kainat kahun, bada hai naam Ali, kainat choti hai. How do I call Ya Ali? How can I say Ali is the one who controls this earth, this creation? Creation small, Ali's name is much larger than it. Today in Pakistan, they have a ruling from some of the hukamat, the judges, that you cannot say the words Ali is Khalifatullah bila fasl. That you can't say it anymore. They're considering it could be made illegal. Ali is the Khalifa with no gap, no break from Rasulullah when he says, Man kuntu mawla fahada Aliyun mawla. From that moment, everyone says, Bakhin, Bakhin, Ya Ali. Congratulations, you're the Imam. So they're saying we can't say this, whereas we say Ali is not just Imam of samawat, of ard. He's also the Imam of the heavens. Right now in heaven, in one of the darajat, there's a place where there is an angel who looks just like Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Look at the riwayat. He looks like him. When the other malaika miss Ali, they go to that angel in heaven. They do his ziyarat. And they say, Ya Allah, bihaqqi Ali, accept our dua. These are the malaika. Some of you have been to Najaf Ashraf. Look at this Ali. Look at that haram of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Amir-e-Mu'mineen, Mawlai Kainat, in that grave. If the angels go to a shabih of Ali, we go to Najaf to speak to Allah Azza wa Jal. Ya Allah, bihaqqi Ali, accept my du'as. Does Ali need khilafah? No. Ali is much greater than khilafah. He said himself, I don't need this thing. It's just why the ulama did not follow the ahad with Allah. Which ahad? Stands for the oppressed. And because of this, I stood up and wrote. Otherwise, he said to himself, لَأَلْقَيْتُ دُنْيَاكُمْ, this dunya of yours, هَذِهِ أَزْهَدْ عِنْدِي مِنْ أَفْتَةٍ عَنْزٍ. This dunya of yours is smaller to me, it's of weaker value to me than the sneezing of a goat. This dunya means nothing to Ali. It's just because the ulama have not done their job. Ya'ni what? For us, an alim must stand for the oppressed of their day. Read a salawat, please. Imam Hussein's third critique of ulama at Mina, do you have your attention inshallah? Is that the ulama, he says, prioritize their culture over their deen. Hussein says this. He says, at that time, the ulama have trampled their covenant with Allah, they have lost their rank with Allah, only because they have chosen the traditions of their ancestors over the rulings of this deen. When the ulama of that time were given the option to follow Abu Abdullah or follow Yazid, they said to themselves, look, we have given bayat already to the Khulafa before and to Muawiyah. How can we go against this tradition and change it and now follow Hussein or follow Ali and follow Hassan alayhi salam? This is why there was a Sulh peace treaty, because they said, we've already pledged for Muawiyah. Many of the tribes, we can't change against our tradition and go back on our heels and go towards you. These are the same people who broke the promise of Ghadir, broke the promise of Mubahila, broke the promise of Dhul Ashira, broke the promise of the Mi'raj, broke the promise of the Hijrat, and now saying we can't break the promise to the Khulafa. So Abu Abdullah says, do you not understand what you've done? You've chosen certain riwayat and traditions over what I'm teaching you. This deen is hikmat, is wisdom, is fear of Allah. It's not fear of tradition. Ra's al-hikmah, the Holy Prophet says, is ma khafat Allah. The height of wisdom is fearing God. So why have the ulama of that time gone against the traditions and followed the traditions of their own families and their ancestors? In our hawzat, in our seminaries, one of my teachers was saying, amongst all the ulama he knows, the two who changed the most under their time was Ayatollah Khoi and Ayatollah Khomeini. They looked at the tradition and they changed many things. How we do rijal has changed because of Ayatollah Khoi. Our epistemology, our sources of knowledge have changed because of Imam Khomeini. Because of these ulama, they were proud enough of the deen to stand against the culture of the tradition they have. Our ulama should be like this. That if we're doing something wrong, the alim has access to Quran and Sunnah and can guide us, not to reinforce the views of the people already. Is the point understood, inshallah? Hussein says the third point of the ulama is they prioritize culture over deen. Number 4, he says, the ulama have misunderstood Allah and Rasulullah, and they expect Jannah just because they are affiliated to the deen. This is a much more subtle point. They don't actually follow Allah in their private life. They don't. They don't follow Rasulullah in their behavior. But the people believe they are linked to the deen. And they think just because they are associated to the deen, that's enough for them. That the views of the people is sufficient for them to go towards Jannah. Why? Because people think they are religious. They wear the libas of the ulama. They speak with the tongue of Rasulullah. They mention the hadith of Rasulullah. They mention the ayat of Quran. They have the amama of Rasulullah. They're on the mimbar of Rasulullah. So maybe they are Rasulullah. They're exactly the same. They're saying the same thing. No, it's not true. Many people have become fraud claiming to be ulama. Many people. This is not new for us. It's happened many times. And we need the right ulama to guide us against the wrong ulama. And by knowing the wrong ulama, we know the grand ulama. Nabi Dawood ala Nabina once said that you, to his people, have stopped tasting the sweetness of ibadat. When you pray, you don't feel enjoyment anymore. When you worship, you don't enjoy anymore. You are waking up to pray in a difficult situation. I mean, these examples are mine. Dawood says, you have lost the sweetness of deen. Why? He says, you have ilm, but you don't follow it anymore. Ilm and amal have one root. They're from the same word, knowledge and action. Ilm and amal, they are the same thing. How can I speak one thing and do another thing? Ayatollah Jawadi Amli says that when you die, you are raised up. It's almost like you are a wall. And that wall is made of bricks. And each brick is either your ilm you had or your amal which you did. You are this. You are your ilm and your amal. You're nothing more. You are not your name. You are not your family. You are not even your age. You are not any of these things. You are not your heritage. None of these things are real identifying markers in akhirah. The only thing is your ilm and your amal. Abu Abdullah says, the ulama of my time, they have ilm but they don't follow it. They know I am the imam. They know. They've seen me sit on the chest of Rasulullah, on his shoulders while he prays. I say they don't follow me anymore. So this critique is on those scholars who have knowledge, but in the action you just don't see anymore. Remember, ilm and amal are one core. Read a salawat, please. Number 5 of the 6 critique of ulama is, Hussein says, Abdullah says, they forgot their social responsibility and they abandoned the blind, the deaf, the dumb, and those who are chronically ill. Abu Abdullah is from the family of Imam Ali alayhi salam, where at night they go and give to the poor. He's from this whole tradition. His mother's the one who has awwal jar thumma dar. We pray for the neighbors, then ourselves. That's where he's from. Now he sees ulama who are more interested in speaking than actually doing. Which doing? The poor. The cry of the oppressed is so loud. Why have they not helped them? After the time of the third Khalifa, at that time, much of the Baytul Mal had been plundered by that time. Much of it. And they were in debt to many of the families of Banu Umayyah because of this reason. When Imam Ali would travel from town to town, he'd see actual communities where their whole wealth has been plundered by Banu Umayyah. And he'd say that by Allah, even if the money has been taken by the poor to purchase slaves, I would free the slaves to return the money to the original owner. Every dinar goes back to the rightful person. Why? This is standing for the poor, standing for huquq. At that time, this had changed. The poor could no longer access the ulama and their haqq had been taken away. Inshallah, I've been asked to recite for Arba'in this year. We'll go through in those days, for those of you who are still here in London, not going to Karbala, the letter from the Imam to Malik al-Ashtar. We'll look at it in detail. And we'll see just how much Imam Ali focuses on the poor in that letter. Those who are so poor, they cannot even beg anymore. Ali spoken about them as well. Husain is the son of this Ali. The Holy Prophet says that I prefer, or to me, standing for the oppressed is greater than 70 years of worship. This is Ahlul Bayt. But the beggars, the homeless, the rough sleeping, the refugees, the asylum seekers, where are we for them? When did we go to them? Rasulullah was tabibun dawarun bitibbih. He was the roaming physician. He would go to the one who was sick and give them spiritual medicine. The ulama roam and move around. But at that time, the madlum had been oppressed. So the fifth of these points is the ulama have abandoned the most poor in society. Wherever you see poverty, you should see ulama with them, supporting them, being a friend towards them. And the sixth, and the last of the critique from Husayn ibn Ali to the ulama of his time is that they abandoned and competed with Ahlul Bayt. They saw an opportunity, a gap of spiritual guidance. And they went on the mimbar instead of allowing Ahlul Bayt on that same mimbar. Which mimbar? Where there was la'an of Ali on that mimbar. By who? By ulama of that time. Abu Abdullah says that they competed with us. They changed the rulings against us. Said Hussein Nasr, one of the great scholars right now, an academic in America, says that there's a big difference between the laws of the West and the laws of Islam. He says the jurisprudence of the laws of the West comes from ideas of the French Revolution, ideas of the Enlightenment, ideas of social contract theory, ideas of the prerogative power. These ideas. In Islam, we get our law from the words of Muhammad alayhi salam. And the Quran. It's a completely different derivation of law. At that time, some people gave rulings instead of going to Al Muhammad to give the rulings for them. Hussein says, why are they competing with us? You call yourself alim. In the Quran, we are rasikhuna fil ilm. Deeply entrenched in knowledge. You say you are ulama. Quran says we are the source of knowledge. Imam Ali said, Nahj al-Balagha, the ilm runs from my hand like water drips from my fingers. What flows in them overflows in me. And they compete with them. The ilm of Ahlul Bayt is a completely different level. Imam Sajjad says, oh Auntie Zainab, Anti alimatun ghayra muallima. You are an alim with no teacher. No one taught you. And the same ulama are speaking against Sayyidah Zainab, criticizing her and her family. So the sixth critique is they competed with us. When we said one thing, they opposed us. These critiques make for us a picture of what a bad alim looks like. What does a good, righteous, honest alim look like? If you want to see the opposite today, look at the marhum Ayatollah Muhammad Syed al-Hakim. Read the salawat, please. Ayatollah Muhammad Syed al-Hakim was born in 1936 in Najaf al-Ashraf. His grandfather is Ayatollah Muhsin al-Hakim, one of our greatest ulama of the modern era, full stop. We could do a whole series just on Ayatollah Muhsin al-Hakim, to riwayat and contribution. He's his grandfather. His teachers were Ayatollah Khoi and Ayatollah Hussein al-Hilli, Maraji. They taught him. He was known in Najaf in young age to have been a brilliant scholar from a very early time. An expert in hadith and asul al-fiqh very early. His scholarship was so known that in his early 30s, he had been on the radar of the Ba'athists. So when, and Ba'athist, as you know, is linked to communism. When Ayatollah Muhsin al-Hakim spoke against communism and spoke that the Shi'ism is completely different to this faith, the Ba'athists disliked this. So from the years of 1968 to 74, they imprisoned Ayatollah Syed al-Hakim. Why? Because he too spoke out against them. So in his early to mid-30s, he's in prison. By who? By the Ba'athists. He comes out of prison. Now that he's out of prison, he continues teaching in the Hawza and building the Hawza of Najaf until Ayatollah Khoy to be what it is now, a great institution. Sheikh al-Tusi, rahmatullah alayhi, established this Hawza 1,000 years ago. We've not seen it as great as it was on the time of Ayatollah Khoy. Syed al-Hakim helps Ayatollah Syed al-Hakim. In 1977, the ulama, the Ba'athists have realized that the Shia are becoming very strong and the Hawza are becoming even stronger. And they noticed that Azadari is the strength of the Shias. So they banned walking from Najaf to Karbala in 1977. It was banned. You were not allowed to do it. Ayatollah Syed al-Hakim was one of the few who stood and led a walk from Najaf to Karbala while it was banned. And even after his life, he would continuously stress on the walk. When he's done, they notice he's the leader and they looked for him. He went into hiding. When? 77. Then it comes to the revolution of 1979. Ayatollah Khomeini has his movement in Iran. And Saddam became very worried something similar will happen in Iraq. So he looked and sought who will be the Khomeini of Iraq. They said it will be Muhammad Syed al-Hakim. He's a great alim scholar. He's the one who'll do the same thing in this country if you're not careful. Saddam looks for him, and in 1983 he finds him and he imprisons him for 8 years from that time. He's in prison, not in any prison. Part of his time, Ayatollah Syed al-Hakim, was in Abu Ghraib, that same prison where the news media came out in the Iraq war of the torture which was done by the American troops to the prisoners. His son, Ayatollah Riyad, narrates that my father, while in prison, would teach Dars-e Kharij. In prison. Dars-e Kharij is the highest level of Hawza, the highest level, where a marja, someone who's qabil of ijtihad, has no books in front of him, he just gives him his own rulings. And you are now listening to a scholar break down the truth in front of your eyes. In prison, at the age of 53, he's giving these lessons to the other ulama in prison. He's released. When? 1991. He's released. He then continues to work for the deen from inside under the time of the Ba'athist. But then in the year 2003, two things happened which changes his own mentality. Two things. Number one, the martyrdom of his uncle, Ayatollah Muhammad Baqir al-Hakim, who was in Iran, came back to Iraq, was following Shahid al-Sadar's movement and was going to establish something very similar in Iraq. He's martyred. He's the senior of the Hakim family. He's killed. So who's the new senior? Ayatollah Syed. Second thing, the fall of Saddam. Saddam's been destroyed now. There's no longer the Taghut in front of them. So now the ulama are able to reopen walking to Karbala and they can re-establish the Hawza. From that time where he's aged 67 until his death last week, we now see an alim take responsibility of the Hawza with Sayyid Sistani. The four ulama we have of Najaf, including him, was Ayatollah Sayyid al-Hakim, Sayyid Ali Sistani, Sheikh Ishaq Fayyad, and Sheikh Bashir al-Najafi. May Allah bless and reward all of them. These four ulama, from the time of the fall of Saddam until now, have reconstructed the Hawza of Najaf, slowly recreating the time of Baghdad and Najaf of Sheikh al-Tusi. Ayatollah Hakim is known for three main things which I'll mention now in the Hawza. Number one, he is the one who helped in reviving the books taught in the Hawza. The textbooks, he regulated which books would be taught when, at which stage. He authored many of them and he would teach them. And he himself would give Dars-e Kharij until his death. An alim to give Dars-e Kharij in his 80s and 90s is a very great thing. One of the ulama of Najaf said, when we attended the lessons of Ayatollah Syed al-Hakim, we saw the way he would teach hadith. It was like watching Zurara bin U'yan, the companion of the Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. The way he would unravel each component of the hadith. We thought, were you there when the hadith was revealed that you know it in such detail? Syed al-Hakim's knowledge of hadith. Also, his scholarship, the books he would publish at that time. He's known for mentioning certain topics which are directly relevant to us in the West. Which other alim has a treatise on internet ethics and cybersecurity? Ayatollah Syed al-Hakim. How many ulama have written an entire treatise on human cloning? Ayatollah Hakim. In his life, through his foundation, he published an entire manual for Shia in the West, in Europe and North America. It's very rare for a marja to take this much interest in our affairs. He did this. And then much later on in his life, we also saw certain projects he funded. The Kaliman Institute was an institute of interfaith, Sunnis, Christians, Zoroastrians, non-Muslims coming to Najaf to meet him. He would encourage academics to write on the Hawza. They loved him because of how open and friendly he was. People will travel from miles to see Syed al-Hakim alayhim rahwan. He's also known for the key leadership role he took at the fall of Daesh. In fact, this moment, many people know it right now, is maybe one of his finest moments in his leadership. After Daesh fell, you have to now reconstruct Iraq. It's a very difficult job. People from the society have literally formed a new government within the government. We have two main issues. Number one, certain tribes have made an alliance to Daesh. Daesh is gone, but the tribes have already shown what they're made of, minorities and small groups. What do we do with them? Number two, there are many women who are victims of sexual slavery right now in Iraq. What do we do with them? Some of them have had children from the fighters of Daesh. What do we do? Ayatollah Hakim stood up, gave two rulings. Number one, any community which fought against ISIS but now turns away, reintegrate them back into society, give them one more chance to repent. Any female who has suffered from violence and other sins from Daesh, take them back into your community, remarry them, they are part of you, don't forget this. When he said this, there was a large increase in the marriages of these women, and the community stopped their infighting from that moment on. Ayatollah Hakim. So now he's passed away. Imagine, this is one of our greatest ulama we have had. One of the four of Najaf. Stood for the oppressed, helped us in the West as well. A man of Darsi Kharij in prison, and a man who truly stood for our riwayat and our traditions. So today, inshallah, it's a great loss for us. So when you, inshallah, after the lecture, when you read Surah Fatiha, remember this alim we are in Fatiha for is a teacher of our great ulama. So how great is he? Inshallah. Okay. On the one hand, you have the ulama we've mentioned of the time of Abu Abdullah, evil, those who abandon the faith. On the other hand, the Rasulullah says some scholars can be greater than the Anbiya of Banu Israel. We are lucky to live in the time of these ulama. May Allah protect and preserve the life of Sayyid Ali Sistani alayhim, or Ridwan alayhi salam. Read a salawat, please. So to conclude that point, and our whole discussion ends now, inshallah. An alim, a scholar, is a very great level. And it can go wrong. And in the time of Abu Abdullah, he saw around him so many examples of the people abandoning him and his family. Whether they are scholars, whether they are ashab by name, whether they were those who grew up with him and Rasulullah, whether those who fought even with him, now so many have opposed him. This majlis today is on the time of the 20-day period after the day of Ashura. The day of Ashura, where the ashab of Abu Abdullah, who we remember today, are of the greatest quality of any companion. Abu Abdullah says, no one has had companions like my companions, none of them. Bi'abi anta wa ummi, Imam Sadiq says. Hur, Habib ibn Madahir, Nafi, Abbas, Burair. These are no ordinary people. When Hussein called, they answered. They said to Imam Sajjad many years ago, why do you still cry after all of these years? Why? How many time has passed since Ashura? You still weep? He says, did Yaqub not cry for Yusuf for a whole lifetime? I have seen 18 Yusufs in front of my eyes. Yaqub cried tears of blood. How can I not cry tears of blood for Ali Akbar? There's a moment on the day of Ashura, and this matter is for the ashab of Abu Abdullah. On the day of Ashura, the enemy have brought all of the bodies lying in front of them on the maqtal. All of the companions and the family of Ali Muhammad, they're lying there. Umar ibn Sa'ad says, bring the horses, trample these bodies of these shuhada, trample them. Before they start, one companion says, stop. This Sahabi's from my tribe. My family won't allow it. Stop it. He takes that body away. While another one says, no, don't trample Nafi. He's from the family of my companions. We cannot take him. They take him away. One by one, each body is taken away until Ali Muhammad are left. Before they start, Shimr says, Abbas is related to my family. Don't trample his body. Another says, Ali Akbar's mother's from my tribe. One by one, each body is taken away. But one body remains. The mother of this body is Zahra. The father of this body is Ali. Where is Banu Hashim to take this body? On that time, they say, this is Abu Abdullah. Anyone who wants revenge from Ali at Badr, come. The horses trample the body of Abu Abdullah. Imam Sajjad says, when I came back, I couldn't lift the body of my father. Why? When I lifted the front, the back would fall, because the horses had trampled every rib of my father. He says, I could hear a cracking noise. What cracking? It was the sound of the ribs of my father Hussein slapping on the plains of Karbala. Now they take these bodies and they behead each of them. They take the heads of our ashab and Ali Muhammad on their spears. And now they walk from Karbala to Kufa to Sham, holding on their spears the heads of every beloved Jan that you know of Ali Muhammad. So when Imam Sajjad looks up, either he sees Qasim, or he sees Ali Akbar, or he sees Abbas, or he looks and he sees the face of Abu Abdullah. Which face? The face which Sayyidah Fatima would kiss is now in the hands of the alcoholic. One takes a stick and hits the teeth of Abu Abdullah. Bi anta wa ummi, Imam says, may my mother and father be sacrificed for the ashab of Imam Hussein. Each one called, each one answered the call of Abu Abdullah. So now come to the day of Arba'in. Take your minds to Arba'in. Those who want to go to Karbala, go there already. Those who want to go, wish you were there on the day of Arba'in. When the women are waiting, they said, we have not done a single majlis for Abu Abdullah. How? Give us black clothes, give us chadar, give us a room where we can mourn, and bring to us every single head of our fathers, our sons, our uncles. As they say, this 72 heads are brought into a room. Each woman takes this head, each wife, each daughter, each child. Then comes the head of Ali al-Akbar. When this head comes, Zainab stands and starts crying and weeping. Then comes the head of Hazrat Qasim. Then they say there's a small 6-month-old head which comes with them. Rabab says, why is my son Ali Asghar's head here? They said, when you were in the camp on Sham Ghariba, Shimr came with a spear and started hitting the ground, saying, Hussein buried the child here, find it. As he hits the ground, he hears a small thud. As he lifts the spear, a 6-month-old body comes. Shimr beheads the body of this child. Each head comes, then comes the head of Abu Fadl Abbas. One of the poets says, maybe the eyes of Abbas were closed. Why? How can Abbas see Rida, Zainab, and Kulthum, and Sakina, and Ruqayya? But then everyone stands. Why? Now comes the head of Abu Abdullah. All the women stand and start mourning and weeping. Zainab says, Wa musibata. But while Zainab is mourning, they say there are 2 heads no one has claimed. Every companion, every ashab, every family, but there is one boy called one boy called Muhammad. Has the mother died for these children? Zainab turns and says, I am alive, I am their mother, but I am mourning for Hussein on the day of Arba'in. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Ridhan wa qadayyu tasliman bi amrih. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, for the sake of all the ashab of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, make us ashab Imam Zamana alayhi salam. Ya Allah, all our ulama, those who have passed away, including Marhum Syed Hakim and all of them, may Allah accept all of their amal, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, any of the sins that we have done, for the sake of our tears in our eyes, forgive us for all our sins, Ya Allah. And Ya Allah, allow all these zawar who go to Abu Abdullah to go and return safely, inshallah. And finally, let this be the final Muharram before the Dhuhr Imam al-Qaim al-Hujjah, inshallah. For the sake of all the marhumin who have, we remember especially Sister Sayyida Aziza Fatima and all of the other marhum Brother Muhammad Saqlain as well. In your hearts with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. اللهم إني أسألك بحق فاطمة وأبيها بعلي ابنيها وأسلم مستعوذ فيها أن تصلي على محمد وآل محمد ماتم حسين. Sallallahu Husain, Sallallahu Husain, Sallallahu Husain, Sallallahu Husain, Sallallahu Husain, Sallallahu Husain. Inshallah with your voices. Sallallahu Husain, Sallallahu Husain, Sallallahu Husain, Sallallahu Husain, Sallallahu Husain. My world and my faith, my world and my faith, I find in your place. I only find heaven when I walk your way. In my chest engraved your sorrows, Hussein. In my chest engraved your sorrows, Hussein. I am beating my chest just to ease the pain. Sallallahu Hussein, Sallallahu, MashaAllah, Sallallahu Hussein, Sallallahu Hussein. Inshallah Karbala, Sallallahu Hussein. Each step from your dome, I'm far and alone. Each step from your dome, I'm far and alone. I'm a lost traveler, help me find my home. Walking with my grief, hoping for relief. Walking with my grief, hoping for relief. All my pain pours away when Hussein I reach. Sallallahu Hussein, Sallallahu, Sallallahu Hussein, Sallallahu Hussein, Sallallahu Hussein. I am at your door, wailing on the floor. I am at your door, wailing on the floor, awaiting for the day that you call my name.
time. Years go by the day, my hair start to gray. Do you see your lover growing old, Hussein? Tears pour down my cheeks from your tragedies. My master, how do I keep my sanity? It's my love for you and your love for me. It's my love for you and your love for me. Oh, the world hubbul Husaina jannani, Amiri Hussein wa ni'mal amir, Amiri Hussein wa ni'mal amir, Amiri Hussein wa ni'mal amir, Amiri Hussein wa ni'mal amir. Sarallah Hussein, Hussein, Sarallah Hussein, Sarallah Hussein, Sarallah Hussein. I now stand here far away from you, crying out with tears. Call me back to you, call me back to you. I send my salams to you, oh, the land of Karbala. I send my salams to you, oh, the land of Karbala. I wish to die in my sorrows for you, oh Karbala. Call me Karbala, take away my pain. Call me Karbala, take away my pain. I wish to visit my master Hussein. Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Sayyidi. Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Sayyidi. Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Sayyidi. Ya Hussein, Syed, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Syed. I have one wish for you, my master, that one day you will call me your servant, call me your servant. I know that I am a sinner and I am unworthy. I know that I am a sinner and I am unworthy, but your love allows my eyes to cry for your tragedies. I beg you, Hussein, by Mother Zahra. I beg you, Hussein, by Mother Zahra. Master, call my name towards Karbala. Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Sayyidi. Ya Hussein, Hey Sayyidi, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Sayyidi. Assalamu alayka يا أبو عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي ألت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. Together we say salam to Abu Abdullah. Assalamu ala al-Husayn وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد وعلى أصحاب وعلى أخي الحسين أبا الفضل العباس واخت الحسين يا زينب كبرى. For all your المرحمين المؤمنات, for the blessings of this majlis, to go to Ayatollah Syed Syed al-Hakim, especially to the marhuma Sayyida Aziz Fatima who passed away. Recite aloud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. Mu'minin, today's majlis was also sponsored by Al-Haj Amir Ali Bhai Muhammad Ali Walji for the Isal Sawab of Marhum Muhammad Ali Walji, Marhuma Zainab Bhai Muhammad Ali Walji, Marhuma Kaniz Fatima Muhammad Ali Walji, Marhum Mohsin Bhai Muhammad Ali Walji, and Kul Marhumins. You are humbly requested to recite Surah Fatiha for all the Marhumins. Al-Fatiha.
السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوسيين، السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام عليكم جميعا شهداء كربلاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء، السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام عليك يا سلطان أبا الحسن علي بن موسى الرضا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولانا يا صاحب العصر والزمان سيدي، الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان. أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وزهورك واجعلنا من أنصارك وعوانك ورحمة الله وبركاته. محمد. الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كل وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا وذليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرزك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.